Continuing with his sharp rebuke, Sha'ul categorically embraces the notion that true biblical Judaism holds to the correct view that a person is not justified by works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ, end quote. And that, obviously, that quote, person is not justified by works of law, is straight out of the letter here. All right, listen up very closely, those of you who have been following my commentary and those of you who are a little new to my commentary, because I'm going to do a little bit of twisting here. I'm going to take a break from the traditional Christian perspective that the Jews of Paul's day were trying to leverage Torah in order to gain salvation. In other words, this kind of a simplistic ladder to heaven, that if you do the Torah, God will reward you with salvation. That's the traditional perspective from the modern Christian church that has studied Paul for the last couple centuries, and I think there's a practical truth to what they're saying. It is practically true that no one can work their way into heaven. No one can earn God's salvation or God's favor by works. It is true. It is theologically, practically true to preach that from our pulpits, that no matter the amount of works that we try to leverage before God, none will add up to salvation. We cannot work our way to heaven. So in terms of legalism, in terms of simplistic legalism, good works will never equal salvation. I understand that. I agree with that theological position. However, listen very carefully, please. I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. What I think is going on in the first century is that the first century Jews didn't quite see their Torah observance in that same way. They didn't really interpret their Torah observance as legalism, at least using the same simplistic definition that the Christian church does today. Instead, I think there's something else slightly different going on, and I owe a lot of my research to people like E.P. Sanders, James D.G. Dunn, Tim Hegg, N.T. Wright, Mark Nanos, authors like that. And I think this is a perspective that is going to carry the most weight, at least in my opinion. Again, don't get me wrong. Before I get started, don't get me wrong. I do believe that any approach to God that circumvents the way of the cross, that circumvents the work of Messiah, that circumvents the blood of Yeshua for atonement, any way that tries to reach God that goes around the only way to Yeshua, to God, which is Yeshua, any other path really is legalism. I understand that. So in that regards, the viewpoints that I'm going to describe here in a moment, in other words, my definition of works of the law, it really is legalism. It's legalism. But the careful distinction I'm trying to make, and I'm belaboring this point because it's really, in my opinion, a kind of a hermeneutic difference between, say, the way that the Christian church interprets and applies the book of Galatians, and the way that many Messianics, I think, should interpret and subsequently apply the book of Galatians. So, strap yourselves in. What do we say when we're riding the roller coaster? Keep your seatbelts on until the ride comes to a complete stop. All right, here we go. Contrary to the popular first century belief that one must either be born Jewish or convert to becoming a Jew, Paul's gospel extended lasting covenant membership to all who would freely embrace the message of the cross event. The word translated here is justified in most of our versions, right? I read that Greek word dikaiosune or dikaios or something like that. It clearly invokes a positional righteousness as determined by Hashem. So justified, just to use traditional Christian lingo, right? To use Christianese, justified is essentially salvation language. It's language that describes joining the people group of God. In other words, it's how you get into the family of God. That seems to be the context of what Paul's saying. All right, positional righteousness. Salvation. Given the current contextual argument right, that we're reading about here, right in Galatians 2:15 and 16, there's this a very carefully reasoned argument, like Paul is a master lawyer in court, and he's really wanting the judge, the jury, the people to hang on every word, and every word has kind of a technical, very specific meaning to it. At least that's the way I see it. Given the current contextual argument, I think that the phrase, quote, by works of the law, end quote, likely means, quote, by conformity to a man-made ritual, end quote, for the Gentile. Or, when the Jew is in view, it's, quote, by being born Jewish, end quote, for the native born. So, it depends on which group you're referring to that works of the law is applicable to you. If you're a Jew, then works of the law applies to your status of being a Jew. You were born a Jew. Works of the law captures that idea, and it extends towards your Torah observance. It kind of motivates your Torah observance. It drives your Torah observance, but it does not create your Torah observance, so to say. It does not create your membership in Israel. But if you're a Gentile, then works of the law describes your entry into the people of God, or entry into Israel, or your entry into the covenant, so to say. So let's keep reading. Works of the law, in my opinion, I'm right here in this paragraph for those of you who are in the live study. Works of the law, in my opinion, could and most probably also envisions the commensurate Torah obedience that was expected to flow out of the life of a professing covenant member, a life of obedience designed to mark a person out as belonging to the treasured people of God. In this way, I say works of the law fashioned and functioned as a badge of identification. All right, so that's why Paul could say we're not justified by the works of the law. We could translate, in my opinion, speaking of verse 15, speaking of 2:16, I think we could translate the whole phrase thusly. A man is not justified, this is my own paraphrase, quote, a man is not justified by his ethnic-driven identity, whether natural or achieved, nor by his subsequent social possession and maintenance of Torah, but by faith in Jesus Christ.